Hello and welcome back, everybody. The first meeting of the new year, the January 16th meeting of the Amherst Planning Board. The first items on our agenda for tonight are to approve the minutes. We'll start with minutes of December 5th, 2012. Does anybody have any comments, improvements?
Move approval.
I'll second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Okay. Opposed? Abstaining? Ms. Kruger, thank you. And the minutes of December 19th.
I will also move to approve.
Second. Further discussion? All right, all in favor? Opposed? Abstaining? Were there any, I didn't catch Connie and Richard's votes on that.
I was in.
Oh, you're all in, okay.
Ms. Anderson, I think, would abstain. Where is she here? That's why I was checking to see. That's why I was checking to see what the name was there.
Thanks, that's good. All right, we'll start with our old business for tonight. We'll continue with discussion of zoning, and so I'll turn it over to the zoning subcommittee for a report on our annual zoning forum. Mr. Crowner.
Before I start, since there isn't a whole lot of public here, maybe we can dispense with this first, or since it's not timed?
Sure. Sir, what are you here for today?
For Gameplay USA at the Big Black Plaza.
Yeah.
I don't, what's that?
4C.
Second version of old business.
Old business B.
Yeah.
We have a split old business.
So,
We can
We could do that.
do that.
C, yeah.
we can,
C.
I don't see why we can't go out of order here.
Yeah.
It's oh, thank you. So we will go out of order here. We're going to proceed to item 4C, which is site plan review 2005-00001, Amherst Big Y Shopping Center, 181 University Drive. A review of the proposed signs for Gameplay USA. So come on up to the microphone, let us know who you are, and tell us what you're doing, please.
I'm Adam from Sign Around. We manufacture the sign for Gameplay USA, and the proposed signage in the plaza itself is for LED illuminated channel letters on the face of the building, 28 inches in height by just over 16 feet in length overall. That fits within the 10% allowance of the ordinance for the front facade, as well as the same logo lettering with translucent vinyl on the front monument sign, ground sign that's presently standing on site.
Okay, thank you. Did anyone have any questions about this signage? It appears to comply with all the applicable requirements of the zoning bylaw. And if there are no further comments, then I would welcome a motion on this.
Move to approve. Is that the proper wording?
I think so.
Second.
Mr. O'Keefe for the second. Any further discussion at all? Anything you'd like to add? All in favor?
Simple enough.
That's unanimous, yes. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Mr. Chair, we also, we also have somebody here for 79 South Pleasant.
Oh, we do?
Yeah.
You here for Amherst College?
I am. I think maybe I'd like to wait. Tom
Okay.
Davies from the college is coming.
Okay,
He's
okay.
going to present. I think I'd defer to him on the presentation.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for pointing that out. Okay. Welcome.
Fast
All
food
right.
restaurant, you can really dispense.
Well, we've started out the new year with a very chaotic beginning, but that's okay. We'll move on to, we'll go back to our zoning subcommittee. Mr. Crowner.
Okay, so I'm going to report on the forum just a little bit, but mostly I'm going to focus on the zoning subcommittee meeting that we just came from, because that was our reflection on the forum and our recommendation about how to move forward. So the forum, which was almost a month ago now, we heard mostly similar comments that we've been hearing recently about concerns about how the rental housing market is affecting neighborhoods, and how we can or should or might tweak the zoning bylaw or not tweak the zoning bylaw to change the conditions. We didn't hear, in my opinion, a lot of new stuff. You have the summary of the comments. There were a couple of points that were made that were sort of new, and that we are going to make a recommendation about to you for going forward. And so I'm going to move now to our discussion tonight. You also have a list of staff recommendations for potential zoning amendments. We discussed all of these, I think, and unfortunately, all of them are worthwhile and worth doing. And there's a lot of them, and this is not even the whole list, obviously. We used to be a 3-page list, and staff apparently realized that was ridiculous. So we still have it. So it's a more focused list. And what came out of our discussion was a realization that the work that we've been doing for the last couple of years is unfinished, in that we've been working on issues that impact housing again, and yet we have not solved the problem. Obviously, we can't solve the problem ourselves, but there are things that we can do to help. And one of those things is figuring out where to or how to accommodate the demand for housing that is being driven by students, by elderly, by boomers, retirees, by millennials, other populations that are not really served by the Amherst housing market, which is focused on 50 style or other kinds of traditional neighborhoods. So what we are proposing to do is, and obviously we would welcome your feedback on this, and we hope that you'll agree with us. We want to continue focusing on developing our centers. We're not 100% sure how to do that, but what we want to do is spend most of our time this spring on reconsidering village centers, possibly considering transfer of development rights, considering tweaks to the commercial zoning district, and also revisiting what we're now calling form-based design regulations. Not form-based, something else. So when we talk about centers, we are talking about North Amherst Village Center and Atkins Corner and the downtown. So all of those are on the table. At least we'd like them all to be on the table to continue our discussion of them, and hopefully bring one or more articles that address center development to Springtown meeting. We're going to take time doing that, so we don't know exactly what we're going to end up with. But that we want that to be our focus. Now, we recognize that there are a bunch of other things that are important. And I think the consensus of the committee was that we would be willing to spend a brief amount of time on some of these other things, and rather than spend multiple meetings developing them, take what staff has developed, what the committee and the planning board has developed over the years, and give it an up or down vote, yes or no, we're going with it or we're not going with it, and not take up our time reworking everything that exists. So the other things that we want, that we think might take a short amount of time and are worth pursuing for the spring, include, first of all, fixing the conflict between Articles 14 and 17 of the last town meeting, where there was conflicting standards for who is going to be managing, or how a converted dwelling is going to be managed. So we got to fix that conflict. There's a possibility of spinning off development, the demolition delay to the general bylaws rather than the zoning bylaw. We're either going to do that ourselves or ask the Historical Commission to take that on. The agricultural processing use category, possibly a medical marijuana article. In other words, putting a use category in there to handle processing of that. 400 Main Street, which I'll return to in a minute. Green building and LID requirements, and permit findings and criteria. So there's, I think, about 6 items there, 6 or 7 items that we think could easily be done in a meeting or two. And if we find that we can't do it, then just move on. I think that's what our recommendation is. So that we can spend the most of our time working up to either bringing back the center development things that we've already been working on, or some other version of them. And I think the approach that we talked about was, rather than bringing them back in identical form, bringing them back in incrementally, not, in other words, not as wide a scope, possibly breaking off the form-based design regulations from the rezoning, and either folding that into existing village center zoning and then doing map changes separately. Making changes to the commercial zone so that it can accommodate residential use more easily than it does now. It's possible now, but it's apparently not really viable. Obviously, nothing has taken off in either of our commercial zones. So in other words, if we can't change those zones, if we can't rezone those things, maybe we can change the zoning that exists so that it works a little bit better. And I guess I would also say that we haven't given up on TDR, but I think there's a sense that it's probably not the direction that we want to go. It'll be difficult to create the kind of article that we want, and the goals that we want to accomplish may be done better some other way. However, I think it is important for the planning board to make that decision, not us. So we probably should have a discussion among the planning board about whether we want to keep TDR in the forefront, change it somehow, or set it aside and come back to it in the fall, or something else. So I guess that's my report. If there's anything that I've left out, I'm sure my colleagues will fill in. So that's the approach that we want to take, and we welcome your discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Crowner. So that was a pretty thorough list. You basically covered most of the items on this staff recommendations sheet. The only ones I can see that you didn't really touch on were the residential rental use amendments.
Sorry, yeah, I should have mentioned that. So we don't have anything, there's nothing ready for us to work on now. It's distinctly possible that the Safe and Healthy Neighborhoods Working Group will ask us to do something, or will present us with something to do. We don't want to ignore that. It's possible that we will want to do something, or they will have to do something before the spring. But we don't have anything on the table right now.
And the other item that you didn't talk about was the technical fixes, permitting for non-conforming properties, and site plan review waiver.
Right. Okay. So those are also things that are important, but that we don't want to spend days and days on. So we're asking staff to bring us language, and if we can deal with it quickly, we'll bring it forward. Otherwise, we'll let it develop in time. That's our recommendation, anyways. If you think it's more important to handle that, obviously we will.
All right. I'll open it up to questions from the rest of the board about, or from the rest of the zoning subcommittee about any thoughts about prioritizing these tasks. Anyone? I will just say that last fall, we spent some time paring down the number of things we were going to bring to town meeting, because there's, while it would be great if town meeting could consider all 12 or 15 of these items, it's not really practical in my mind for planning board to bring all of these to town meeting. It's important, I think, that we try to prioritize them and decide which ones we're willing to do. So I think we got to spend some time either tonight or at our next meeting going through and trying to help the zoning subcommittee focus in their efforts. Mr. Tucker?
Part of what the subcommittee talked about was that at their next meeting, they would look at the draft language for the majority of these and assess their status, and then bring recommendations to the full board about what the subcommittee thought might be possibly ready or useful to try to bring to town meeting. I think what they're doing tonight is describing sort of the range of possibility, and they want, my understanding, and they can and will, and correct me if I'm wrong, was that they wanted to refine that further and bring it back to you for your consideration.
Is that so? Ms. Kruger?
I think that is so. However, I think if we have an opportunity to get a sense of priorities while we're all together, it would be helpful, because for members of the board there on the zoning subcommittee, and we were very engaged in the discussion, but every time we'd get to an item, it was important for any number of reasons. And if there's a way to sift through and get your take on some of these without fully kind of vetting the merits of each one, I think that would be helpful. One thing we did talk about is sort of clumping some of these together. So under center development, you might have 5 or 6 of these bullet points, and we may then do 1 or 2 or 3 of them. So some are technical fixes. There's a few that might go back under that. So we might have an evening where we just look at technical fixes and figure out what's going on and what needs the most attention. So we're also trying to bundle things in some logical groupings. But for me, it would be really helpful to hear what other people on the board are thinking, because I think we're an instrument of the planning board, not, a separate entity as such. So it seems like we have a little bit of an opening here to have a conversation.
Sure, thank you. Ms. Kruger, Mr. Rosnoy?
I'd agree that some lumping of things together is probably would be beneficial. I would look at it in a different way. However, I go back to what Mr. Tucker referred to many meetings ago, talking about housing, that it's like a malleable bubble, and that if it's not available in one place, the bubble's going to push out in another place and go there. And it's clear that we have a need for some of this housing, as Mr. Crowner described, for some of the demographics that he described. And we've heard repeatedly over the last number of months this concern about student housing. And I think unless we meet it head-on and identify it as student housing and stop being afraid to identify it as student housing, I think we're going to be in trouble when it comes down to having votes and getting approval for whatever we come up with. There's a need for that demographic to find housing, whether it's students or young professionals or millennials, as you described them. And as Mr. Tucker described it with his malleable bubble, if we're not allowing them to develop an area such as, for example, the Gateway, where a particular number of housing units to meet that demographic can be built, then they're going to go, the bubble's going to press into other places. And that's why we're having this problem with residential areas, long-standing single-family homes, and those neighborhoods that are getting changed right now. So my recommendation would be to identify it as a need for this type of housing, whether it's rental or residential for unrelated people renting a house or whatever it is, and how are we going to accommodate that need? And under that grouping, then there are village centers, there are commercial districts, there are other types of districts, and this is where we are going to advocate putting these types of new units. But I think we have to specifically address it as a positive need. I think we've heard a lot over the last 6 months about this need and how some neighborhoods don't want it. And we have to explain to people why, if they're not going to approve it in one particular area, it's going to show up in a different area.
Thank you, Mr. Rosnoy. Yes, Mr. O'Keefe.
So there's an important item still out there that I think speaks directly to a lot of the points that Mr. Rosnoy just made, which is the market study that's been funded by town meeting a year ago and still is, I hope, in process. I was hoping we would be a little bit further along with it by now, but we're not. And I, in my mind, that hopefully will serve to at least give us a way of talking about many of the issues that Mr. Rosnoy brought up, which I do think are important. I have a lot of concern about coming back to town meeting with major village center and downtown development initiatives with A, that housing study still floating out there, and B, the prospect of also at this spring meeting, we are hoping to have substantial changes to the town's rental regulations in the form of registration and permitting regulations that obviously the Safe and Healthy Neighborhood Working Group has been working on for a couple of months now. And we've heard over and over at town meeting this refrain of we need to answer some of the types of questions that Mr. Rosnoy brings up before we should be making major changes to our downtowns or our village centers. And my fear is that we'll witness a replay of that with those items still out there. And I think that going forward, we might be a lot better positioned in the fall to come forward with some of these initiatives, having hopefully passed in the spring substantial improvements to our rental regulation system, and to be able to say to people, look, we've done X, Y, and Z to try to address the issues that people have talked to us about. And I think that we'd probably be in a stronger place to start doing village center changes at that point.
Thank you, Mr. O'Keefe. I have a question. You said that, Mr. Crowner, you said that you thought that transfer of development rights, TDR, was not something that you wanted to pursue at this time. That, I guess we're gonna have to bring that up when we have more time, but that was something that I thought was a fairly high priority, so I was surprised to hear that the subcommittee wanted to deprioritize it. Yes, Mr. Crowner.
So that was the consensus of the subcommittee, was not shared by all members of the subcommittee. But I think that it was also the consensus that center development was also important and was more feasible, and we had a path to go already set out for us, more or less. Whereas TDR is something new, and it's not clear that it would achieve our purpose, which is to find a capacity for housing. That's what I think it's designed for, but maybe there are other ways of doing that, and maybe the way, rather than trying to incentivize development, we just make it possible. So I think that's the that was where we were coming from. I would still like to explore it, but I also want to work on village centers. I don't think it's possible really to do both justice. So the question is, maybe what we should do is table village centers and get a head start on TDR, thinking that we'll bring it up in the fall or next spring or something, but at least we'll have started working on it. Maybe that is the approach that Mr. O'Keefe would recommend, or somebody would recommend, but I'm not sure that that's the best way. I don't know what to do.
Thank you, Mr. Crowner. So there's a lot of good items on this list. I would suggest that we take this as a homework assignment, unless anybody's opposed to that. Mr. O'Keefe?
Just one more thing. Mr. Crowner mentioned wanting to come back to 400 Main Street, which he hasn't done yet, because everybody might not be familiar with that issue.
Before we do that, could I just add on to the Village Center discussion, I guess kind of a response to Mr. O'Keefe. I've spent a lot of time thinking about a way forward and trying not to be discouraged about continuing to work on the Village Center concepts for 3 or 4 parts of town. And I'm thinking that some of this can be underway, maybe a really scaled back vision, and to keep the momentum so that there's a clear message from this board that these are our priorities and that we haven't backed off of our vision for Village Center and Town Center development, and we're going to take another fresh look at it, and maybe before Springtown meeting decide not to go ahead with one or more of the areas for a strategic reason, or it's not ripe, or it needs more work. But I'm worried that if we just say we're just going to wait till the fall because we have to do rental registration first, we're not putting out that clear statement that this is enough of a priority that we're going to keep looking at it and reevaluating and thinking of a way forward. So I don't disagree with you, but I think on balance, I've come around to wanting to be hopeful that we can find some pieces of this that make sense now and maybe evaluate closer to Springtown meeting if we're ready or not.
Thank you, Ms. Kruger.
A question?
Mr. Rosnoy?
The question for staff. I agree with Mr. O'Keefe's reliance on the housing market study as being so important. What is the status of that right now?
The housing production plan, which was the first half of that, which includes substantive analysis of the town's current housing and housing needs, all to provide a framework within which to understand and then make recommendations about affordable housing, is in draft form now and is being reviewed by staff and I believe the Housing and Sheltering Committee. So we should have that in hand fairly quickly, and it is a great deal of the information in that confirms what we have been suspecting all along, that there's a very substantial housing need. The housing market study, we are in negotiations with a consultant currently about the scope of that work. We have a proposal from a sound consultant. The problem the first time round was that we did not get good responses to the RFP. We have this time, we're negotiating about what the scope includes, and we expect that that will be done prior to the annual town meeting, and we'll have it in hand. The traffic study, which was part of the Gateway project need, has been completed. We have not yet received it from UMass. We have had a brief presentation on it, and what needs to be done is the creation of an executive summary to explain its results in a clear fashion. So it's all coming together. We don't have it to give you right now, but we will soon.
Thank you, Mr. Tucker. All right, anything more, Mr. Crowner?
Yeah, I wanted to respond to about 400 Main Street.
Yes.
So I think it was in the packet, there was a letter from the property owner who wants to sell it to Amherst Media, and in order to facilitate their plans, it would be better for them to have the zoning changed to be in. So, so our understanding is that that article, that amendment will be on the warrant. Definitely because it's a property owner's request made to the select board. So it's going to be on the warrant. The question is, how much time do we want to spend on it as a zoning subcommittee, as a planning board, and do we want to take ownership of it? Do we want it to be a planning board article, or do we want to let the petitioner or the select board bear the responsibility for presenting the article and defending the article? Obviously, we would take a position, we would make a recommendation, and the committee has a pretty clear opinion about the article. I think we like it, but we also were not. We didn't think that we weren't sure that we wanted to take ownership of it, both for questions of time and also questions of strategy. In other words, does it look better for it to have our name on it or a citizen's name on it? So that's a question. Do you want it? Do you want us to do it? Do you want us to? Because it's sort of and the argument made by the petitioners is that this is in furtherance of the master plan. It's in furtherance of our vision for that area. It continues the rezoning that we've already done in that area, and it's a good thing overall. So maybe we do want to take ownership of it, but then there's also responsibility that comes with that. So.
All right, thank you, Mr. Crowner. Okay, in the interest of time, I'm going to say thank you for considering all this. It sounds like we still have some work to do before we can go through this item by item. Now that we've had a chance to hear where the zoning subcommittee is at with it, I would suggest that each of us go through and try and, sort this list in some fashion and come back at our next meeting and try and prioritize. And so I think that would be very useful. If anybody has any other ideas about how we could approach the prioritization of these tasks, I'm certainly open to it. other than Mr. Tucker making the decision. Oh, yes.
Well, I wonder if just, as homework, it's really, if that's going to work, or if we should engage, not necessarily tonight, in some exercise where, something as simple as you give each one a 1, 2, or 3, or we put them all on some flip charts, and we actually have, if there's 12 items, and you have 6 dots, we see what the group's consensus is of our priority, because it's really hard to kind of, I don't know if we're going to succeed in prioritizing if we do it individually, or some way where we really participate in marking these and making that hard decision. So there's a couple of different techniques planners use to get priorities done.
Well, I would certainly be willing to let you take the lead on that, Ms. Kruger, because you seem to have a method in mind. I think, that's more or less what I was thinking of, is go through and give each one a 1, 2, or a 3, and then we'll total them up and see if something gets all 1s, then we'll know that's at the top, and if it gets all 3s, we'll know that we're gonna put it up. So that would be one way to kind of, we can do it as a group exercise, or we can do it individually.
And 2 of our members aren't here, and so
Right.
maybe just some way to get them to join in. And
Well, in a way, we have a distorted group because 4 of us are members of the zoning subcommittee. So in other words, the zoning subcommittee actually is pretty good at, reaching consensus on. Obviously we have a lot more work to do, but I would imagine that we'll have our own, opinion. So maybe, so the dot thing will be skewed is really what and also the Atkins Corner form-based whatever.
design regulations.
Yeah, design regulations is a, kind of a different, kind of a dot than, say, fixing a glitch, technical glitch. So actually, I'm wondering if simply that if our group could not just make a recommendation to the remaining members of the planning board, at the planning board meeting for endorsement or not endorsement.
That's certainly fine, too. Mr. Rosnoy?
I don't think I could put assigned numbers to the
Yeah.
list as it exists
Yeah.
because of my statement earlier. I see the list as being organized in a different way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so it sounds like we're going to have to have further discussion about this, maybe after you've had a chance to further discuss it as subcommittee and when we have our 2 missing members with us. Mr. O'Keefe?
So the only other thing that I would add to that is I would very much like to have something happen at our next meeting, though.
Yeah.
Even though we might not have a full complement at that
Yeah.
meeting either, because I'm always, I've got the calendar in front of me here, and I'm
Yeah.
always conscious of the fact that we have, like, every zoning season has 3 months less than you would want to have in it, and the deadlines are always right around the corner. So I'm just counting meetings between now and when sort of the warrant language needs to be finalized and the warrant gets signed and stuff, and there's not that many. So we do need to make those decisions early, because if we postpone them into February or March, then
There's no time left.
time runs out really rapidly.
Right, okay. Okay, good. Thank you, everyone. Moving on. Was there any public comment on zoning tonight? Okay. Under old business, did we have any topics not reasonably anticipated 48 hours prior to the meeting? Okay. We'll take a short pause here.
Oh, easy.
I'm going to take a short.
The board's-
I'm going to take a longer pause.
How to deal with housing needs. Pulling in the housing market study. The basis of whatever recommendations someone. How many people, whether they're
Good night, Jonathan.
professionals or.
Thank you.
And we see this happening by having 47 and 16.
Mr. Chair, Should I invite 179 Northampton Road in?
Oh, yes. I thought they were already in here.
Sure, sure. Sure. Sure, and then just so to let people know we don't have our head in the sand, recognize that some residential, single-family houses are still going to be converted. But hopefully starts diminishing as we I heard what Neil LaCour said at town meeting, didn't you?
Actually, I was away, but I
Well,
heard
he
it
said
firsthand.
since the seventies, there has not been. That's what needs to come out of the zoning subcommittee, a plan.
All right. We have the next item on our agenda, appearance with respect to a ZBA application, 179 Northampton Road, the Wilson Properties Group LLC. Just real briefly, for those watching at home, the Zoning Board of Appeals will be considering a special permit application to build a two-family home, and the planning board has requested that the applicant present their project to us for comments and possible statement of some kind on our part to the ZBA. So we don't have any authority to, grant or deny this project at all. We're here purely in an advisory capacity. We did receive a copy of the permit materials, which we've had a chance to review. And so we'll proceed directly to a presentation from the applicant.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Mr. Rustrup. My name is Tom Reedy. I'm an attorney with Bacon Wilson in Amherst, Peter McConnell's office. Here on behalf of Wilson Properties Group, LLC. It's a Massachusetts limited liabilities company. And don't be afraid, they're local. They live in Pelham. They're part of the community. They've been here for many years, and I'll get into that in a little bit. Here with me this evening, Pete Wilson and Harry Wilson. And we're here on 179 Northampton Road, and I would imagine you're all familiar with the property. It has a pretty prominent and visible location in town. As Mr. Chairman pointed out, we are seeking a special permit from the Zoning Board of Appeals. We were there last Thursday evening, I believe. And we're seeking it under 3.321. We're seeking to construct a new two-family dwelling, and more specifically, a non-owner occupied duplex under 3.3211. So I'm going to give you a little background on the procedure, the process, where we've come from, and how we got here today, the applicants and the property itself. So we originally filed a Zoning Board of Appeals application in October and went to an informal review with the Design Review Board. In your packets, I believe you have an original submission and then amended, revised documents. Those revisions were based on the feedback from the Design Review Board. They were extremely helpful, and the applicants really listened and instituted what was suggested. There were some issues as to massing and windows and making it look like the surrounding neighborhood, and I think you'll see if you compare the two, sidewalks are different, decks are different, orientation of the building is different. There are gables now, there are more windows. Porches are different and the lighting is different.
Ms. Brestrup?
I'm sorry, you did not receive copies of the previous plans. You just received copies of what is being currently proposed.
Thank you, Ms. Brestrup.
Well, then I'm sorry for that. I have one if you'd like to take a look at it, if the board would like. I can pass it around.
We're okay with the new one.
Okay,
Thank you.
And so after the Design Review Board process, it was when the town was looking to change the bylaws, I'm sure you're all aware. And so what we did was we figured, all right, we don't know what bylaw we're going to be operating under, so let's continue it. And it also gave the applicants a chance to go back to the drawing board based on what the design review board had to say and tweak it, and that's how you have the documents you have today. So the Zoning Board of Appeals allowed a continuance. We amended the documents and went back in front of the Zoning Board of Appeals last week. In the interim, the Wilson brothers went in front of Wilson Properties Group, went in front of the Historical Commission seeking a demolition permit. I believe that the Historical Commission voted 6-0 unanimously to allow that demolition permit, or saying that they didn't need a demolition delay. If you've seen the property, it's in a state of disrepair and has been for quite some time. So we were in front of the Zoning Board of Appeals, and they suggested a few things. And so we haven't implemented all those changes because we wanted to get your feedback and hear your recommendations and suggestions as well. So I just want, as a caveat to this presentation, is that we are aware of some of the issues that are present with the site and the elevations. Landscaping, the Zoning Board of Appeals requested a landscaping plan, a lighting plan, a parking plan, a fence plan, and the applicants are dealing with the issue of the driveway and the shade tree. So these are all things that are on our plate and we are addressing, but like I said, we wanted to come in front of you at your request and listen to what you had to say. A little bit about the applicants. As I said, Wilson Properties Group is a Massachusetts limited liability company. Pete and Harry Wilson are in the construction and property management business. They have done so since 1986. They only manage properties that they own. They don't go to anybody else. They currently manage 6 properties, 5 in Pelham, 1 in Hadley, with minimal, if any, issues. And they've been doing that since about 1986. As I said, they both live in Pelham. They've been part of the community. They are part of the community. They go by Northampton Road fairly often, a few times a week, every other day, and they're about 15 minutes away. The property itself, the structure is from at least 1886. That's the earliest maps. It's had additions and changes since then. At one time, it was, we believe, a 2-family. It's not really pertinent here, but we believe it was a 2-family. I'll start in 1986 when the owner, with the last name of Costa, husband and wife, my understanding is that the husband passed away and the wife purchased another property in town at that time. The wife moved out, left the house vacant. That's when it started to fall into disrepair. So since about 1986, it's been vacant. In May of 2006, a Providence limited liability company came, purchased the house, pretty much emptied it out. Cut down some trees, cut down some shrubbery. That's where the foundation hole came from, got the permits for certain renovations, but just really didn't do anything besides gut the place. November of 2006, Wilson Property Group purchases it. They thought maybe they'd be able to salvage some of it, but unfortunately, it was in such a state of disrepair that, you know, as time's passage kind of dictates, demolition seems like the only option. They had, once they initially bought it, meetings with Jonathan Tucker to try to figure out what they could do with the property. And I think, again, it was just in such a state of disrepair, they went back and forth with what they wanted to do if they wanted to salvage it. The lot itself, as it exists, is 29,987 square feet, which provides the requisite dimensions for a 2-family dwelling. It's a corner lot, as I said, in a prominent neighborhood, and I would associate it more with Northampton Road than Blue Hills Road because of the location and because of the footprint and the past structure that has been there. As far as a proposed site and building, I'm going to turn to Mr. Harry Wilson, who will take us through the site plan and the elevations. What I'll do after he's done is come back to the rental piece of it, because I've got a revised complaint response plan. I submitted the initial one to the Zoning Board of Appeals. They had some comments. I've gone back to the drawing board, and I've got a new one that I'd like to give to Ms. Brestrup to hand out to all of you. And I'd like to talk about the lease because the lease is really designed specifically for this property with hopefully addressing the concerns of the town, you know, so there's something about the noise bylaw, the nuisance house bylaw, for unrelated, parking. You can't park on a surface that isn't used for parking. So if there's where there's grass, if a tenant were to park there, as the applicants have done in with their other properties, it can be towed at the owner's expense. And it's something that they've done before and they're not afraid to do again. I think in total, they don't want to maintain a problem house. This is their first foray into Amherst. And I think you'll see from the site plan and the elevations that it's a thoughtful project. And I think they're willing to listen and to institute, you know, whatever reasonable changes that you may suggest. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Wilson.
Good evening. I'll ask you to just take the microphone off of its stand and introduce yourself to us, and welcome.
Hello, I'm Harry Wilson, and my brother Pete behind me. This is a house that we purchased, like Tom said, that we purchased back in '06. And working with the house that's there, you know, recognizing it's a large, prominent house. Structure, and working with the architect designer, Jen LaForge, we come up with a plan that we really like, and we hope that you guys like it too. Keeping that large structure, we're gonna look at start off with the footprint of the house. We're trying to keep with the similar footprint with what's there already existing, and working with the grade with the land, the way the land lies and runs off. That, you know, we're trying to make it so it has the same driveway entrance. It's going to have garages under the building, and keeping the parking area to this corner, and trying to keep the majority of the lot open. You know, having grass and landscaping throughout. Going to the house itself. Like I said, we tried to keep with Northampton Road and keep the architecture kind of similar with the houses that are on the road, and you know, and adding a little some new twist to it. Most of the houses on the street have got gables facing the road. The majority of them do. So we tried to keep that, and then also, you know, changing direction and adding gables. Also keeping in the old, you know, the wide corner posts, trim around the windows, frieze board, trim boards, the nice porches, and you know, good, large, nice sized decks. And it will have, you know, architectural shingles on the roof to kind of simulate the slate that's on the structure presently. Lighting wise, so we can go back to the site plan here. Lighting, we've got lighting proposed on the front of the structure. On both units, we've got sensored lighting that will come on if anyone's walking on these paths. The sensor will pick up and light that area. Also, there's recessed lighting under the porches, which actually on its own right will illuminate quite a distance if that light's on. It won't be censored, but there'll be lighting on the decks. There'll also be censored lighting in the rear of the building where the garages are at and the parking area, which will illuminate those areas, and will also be censored if someone's driving in or if they're coming out of the building. And that is, I think that's pretty much it. Is there any questions that you have? Or?
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Did the board have any questions for the applicant? Mr. Schreiber.
So there are kind of 4 basement areas, 2 of which are garages, and then 2 of which aren't. What are the ones that aren't garages?
Okay. each unit's gonna have their own garage. One's coming in on this side, the other's coming in on this side. Those will be the full length of the house, the 34 feet. And then there'll be a separation wall between the garage and the other section of basement, which will be more for storage and for the utilities, like the boilers and electric panels and hot water tanks. So that's how that's gonna be separated up. And each will have their own, each unit will have their own garage and their own storage area.
Will it be heated? Will that storage area be heated?
It will not be heated, no.
I
But
guess
the natural temperature in a basement stays about 45 in the wintertime, and, yeah.
I'm just curious if it could be habitable space.
It's not gonna be habitable space, it's just for storage, and the garages will be for parking cars and putting, you know, hand tools and, you know, whatever that's one might need.
Ms. Kruger?
This might be me, but I'm having trouble seeing how you go from the parking spaces to the building. I don't see what the pathway is and what the lighting is in relationship to the non-garaged parking.
Okay, on each of these buildings, there's also an additional doorway besides the garage door. So for people that are coming in from the parking lot, I believe that they will want to come and go through the doorway that's there, provided to go into their own unit. But they'll be lighting. There's coach lights on the garage, and there's also I mean at the doorway, and there's sensored spotlights that will come on when a car is detected driving in the parking lot, and that will stay on for about 10 minutes.
So just to follow up, is there a sidewalk or a paved area between the parking?
This whole area is actually, hang on one second.
Oh, I really.
We went ahead and cleaned
So-
up this plan. Okay, I went ahead and cleaned up this plan, got rid of all the markings for the sewer lines and the water lines and all that was in there, kind of clogging up the parking lot. Anyway, this whole area that's outlined will all be paved area, and that's all connected to the building. So that will all be paved, so that there won't be need of sidewalks, because it's all paved area.
So on the spotlights, the motion-sensitive spots, are those going to be downward facing, or do those have any possibility of disturbing neighbors when they go on?
You know, when we install the lights, we're gonna set them so they don't go past the parking area, so they stay within the parking area. And we're not gonna set them up too terribly high, so that they will, you know, continue into other spaces. The good thing about it is where the parking lot's located, it's facing toward, all these lights are going to face towards the street. The closest house is here. None of the lights will be even aiming remotely towards that house. And then we've got some trees and shrubs that are all along the road here, which will kind of cause to diffuse the light. We also have a street light directly across the driveway, which is going to illuminate light all night long. There's also another street light on Route 9, which is right at the across from the entrance to Blue Hills Road, which also illuminates light here. And then we also have the football field across the street, which at times lights are on, and it makes, from what I understand, it's pretty bright. So.
Yes, it is.
Mhm.
I have to say that it's great to see that someone's doing something with this property. it's been a mess for decades, really. And so it's, I mean, it's good that you're willing to make an investment in the property and make it useful to the town. Other questions from the board? All right. Mr. Reedy, did you want to come back up?
Yes. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson.
Thank you. So I've given Ms. Brestrup a copy of the response plan, and I don't know if in your packets you also have a copy of the lease. You do?
We do.
Okay. And so what I think you'll find if you look through the lease is some specific provisions, as I alluded to before, essentially mimicking the bylaw. You know, the definition of, I guess, let me step back. This is so that the tenants fully know what they're getting when they sign this lease. You know, it's not to exceed 4 unrelated individuals. The applicants hope that it'll be a family, and as, I guess, a traditional family. But obviously, we prepare in case it is not, and so that's what the provisions in this lease will take care of. I'll call your attention directly to Section 5, Care, Cleanliness, and Conduct. And in there, that's where the teeth are as far as making some offenses evictable. And obviously, I would assume that you're all aware of Massachusetts landlord-tenant law and the restrictions that are on landlords in this state. So obviously, they would do their best to, within the confines of that law, stay true to the lease. The tenant is specifically commended to the provisions of the Town of Amherst general bylaws as amended relative to a nuisance house and unlawful noise. Gatherings associated with the unit may not exceed. In yours, you've got 15. We've reduced that to 10. And essentially what would happen is that we just want to institute a dialogue between the tenants and Wilson Properties Group. Typically what they'll do in their other rental properties is say, listen, talk to the neighbors. Let them know that you expect to have a gathering. I mean, in a dwelling unit, having an additional 10 people might not seem like a lot, but it happens quite often. You figure Sunday you've got the Patriots game or whatever sports team you're rooting for, and to get 10 people there is, you know, probably pretty common. So what would happen is that they'd have to let Wilson Properties Group, Pete Wilson or Harry know, and then they would give them some suggestions. Call your neighbor, let them know what you're gonna do. So everybody's put on notice. And that's one of the big things in my discussions with my clients. They continually say they wanna be neighborly. They're willing to take this on. And they wanna have a dialogue and conversations with the neighbors. They don't wanna be at arm's length. For automobiles, you'll see in the lease, the tenant may park, in that this is up for debate whether we're going to do parking spaces or a fixed number of cars. The zoning board hasn't decided yet or really given too much inclination. But as I said, if vehicles are parked in any place other than a designated parking area, it will be towed at the owner's expense. And those are just some of the provisions in the lease. Also, I'd like to say that if it's being rented to an undergraduate student, typically, and I would imagine the same is true here, what would happen is they would seek a parental guarantee. So there are other provisions where the tenants, if there is a violation found, are responsible for the fines and could also be evicted. The parental guarantee guarantees the lease and that the students or, you know, young adults will perform in accordance with that. So typically what Pete and Harry have found in practice is that if the parents are willing, because they'll only allow this to be signed if the parents are willing to, and if the parents are willing to sign that guarantee, typically those young adults are well behaved. And I mean, when students go off to college, a lot of the times the parents don't have too much control over them, but at least this is another mechanism to enforce the lease. I'll turn to the complaint response plan now, and I would sincerely appreciate any feedback that you have. My understanding is that this is the first one in Amherst, and so one of the zoning board of appeals members read the preamble essentially and said, you know, this is, to the town warrant, this is why we're doing what we're doing. And I know it's also come from you. And so in theory, you have an idea of what you'd like it to look like. In practice, I'm candidly not too sure what you'd want it to look like. So sincerely, I'm open to your suggestions. So what you have in front of you is a response plan. The owner and the rental property management entity is Wilson Properties Group. We've provided their mailing address. We've also provided their a cell phone and an email address. Generally, there are some statements there. The above owner management entity shall be notified by telephone, email, or certified mail of any and all complaints, just so they have it on record and we know that they know. They'll provide within 7 days of any request to any neighbor within a 300-foot radius the name, contact information, and unit designation of the on-site managers. And so what that's saying is there will be on-site managers. It's not going to be a resident manager under the bylaw. It's more of a point of contact person, someone who can, if there's a problem, immediately respond. And so then if you move down to the tiered response plan, you'll see the different, I guess, levels of immediacy, I'll call them. First is emergency. If there's an emergency, the complainant should call 911. And then there's the second level, immediate response required. And so if the complainant thinks they reasonably determine that, you know, this is a 2 a.m. party, something's got to give, what can we do? Well, first, contact the on-site manager, whether in person or by telephone. The on-site manager will be directed to listen, to report back to Wilson Properties Group, and try to themselves take care of whatever they can take care of. Now, if there's a horde of people, one person is probably going to have a difficult time dealing with it. So the next step is, if either the on-site manager is not around or provides an inadequate remedy, and I try to, at the beginning, say timeliness and adequacy are determined on a reasonable, based on reasonable expectations, given the specific facts of the circumstances. So if the on-site manager isn't there or able to respond, or the response is inadequate, then you go to the second piece, which is contacting Wilson Properties Group. Wilson Properties will listen, get the information, and make a determination at that time what to do. Notably, in the first part, if the on-site manager addresses the issue, they're going to respond to the complainant and say, listen, this is what I've done, here's the result. Either it worked or it didn't work. That then at least allows the complainant to know something was done and I've got to do something else. Whether at that time they choose to call the Amherst Police Department's non-emergency number, whether they choose to call the emergency number, that's kind of up to the discretion of the complainant as is currently. But what we've tried to do here is provide a few different processes whereby the complainant can take care of what their issue is. So you've got the on-site manager. If they're unavailable or it's inadequate, you go to Wilson Properties. If they're unavailable or the remedy is inadequate, then you can go to the police. And obviously, at any time, you can go to the police, but we've just suggested this hierarchy. I've then got a non-emergency response provision that if there's something like the trash has been left out or somebody's blowing a horn every night at 10 p.m. when they leave, something that maybe doesn't necessarily require immediate attention, that will go directly to the properties group. I mean, it could also go to the on-site manager, and then there's a reporting mechanism in here where if the on-site manager hears a complaint, they've got to report it to the properties group. And then some general responsibilities is that one of our fears is that there will be neighbors who may have bad intentions to annoy, harass, what have you. So we're trying to leave a little bit of discretion with the property managers to say, let's check the veracity, let's check the substance, and check the merits of this complaint. If there's something there, by all means, we'll follow through to the extent we can. But if there's not, they shouldn't be held to evict the tenants based on a 3 strikes and you're out, say, because there could be 3 baseless claims just for the sake of getting to those 3 to harass the tenants of the property. So again, this is an attempt at it, and I'd be happy to hear any comments that you have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Reedy, and I do commend you on forging new ground. You are indeed the first one to prepare a response plan under our new, the new section of the zoning bylaw. So I think I saw a couple hands up on the board. Mr. Rosnoy?
Yes, regarding this on-site manager, perhaps members of the planning board other than I would have better input for you, but I believe there was quite a discussion about the word qualified on-site manager being a part of this, and it's more than just designating one of the people who live there as, okay, you're the manager. I think there are some criteria that go along with this. And I'd like to hear more about, you described yourself something about the on-site manager is not, I forget the words you used, but not one particular thing. But I believe the concept of the qualified on-site manager is that this entity will have quite a bit of authority to address things by him or herself or themselves, and that the intent of this amendment to the bylaw was not to let it get passed down to the property owner, but to have it dealt with on the spot by somebody with authority. Now, I don't know, perhaps others on the board here have more input as to the definition of qualified when it comes to on-site manager, and I'd like to hear that discussion, because I don't think I was a part of all that. But I think this is an important thing, and I would encourage you to upgrade the authority of the on-site manager and stress the importance of having a qualified on-site manager and doing something to make sure that person or that entity is qualified.
If I may, we certainly took that into consideration, and so under the bylaw, there is a resident manager, and I think that's what you're talking about, a qualified individual. When we were in front of the Zoning Board of Appeals, they seemed to think that it could be either a management entity or a resident manager. And so the way we've crafted this is to have the management entity be responsible ultimately. We don't want to make the resident manager an agent. And so that's why we're talking about an on-site manager as opposed to a resident manager. It may be a difference of semantics, but we think that there's something behind it because we don't want to necessarily associate, like I said, an agency relationship between Wilson Properties and this individual. So as I tried to describe it, it's more of a point of contact, and we think that under the bylaw, we're taking care of the issue of having a management entity manage the property.
Mr. Schreiber?
It's a great point, and it's a great case study because I saw it more as an agent of that the on-site manager would be a deputy or an agent of ultimately either the owners or in this case, the property management group. But I guess I wonder about what if there's what if the on-site manager doesn't agree with, Wilson Property Management? I mean, it's the old field manager versus general manager.
And I think that in other rental properties that they have an informal discussion with an individual who is that point person. I think that we could, maybe come up with some sort of written documentation between the properties group and this on-site manager, delineating the responsibilities, the expectations, and, I hesitate to say duties because I don't want to impose any sort of principal-agent relationship. But it's definitely something to think of. To actually have the on-site manager make decisions in their stead, I think that that's going to cause a problem, obviously, as you've pointed out. So, again, I'd be open to any suggestions that the board would have to actually rectify that situation.
So, thank you also for asking us for our opinion. I'll just give a couple general suggestions. For me, the response plan is thorough, but it's hard to read. For one, it's the small caps typeface is very difficult to read. Okay. And the other is that there's just a lot of big words in it. So I would say that maybe if it was written in a little more plain English that even a college student could understand. that it might work better.
Understood.
Yes, Mr. O'Keefe?
A couple things. Going back to the lease, I think the lease is terrific, and I really would like to applaud you for having addressed many of the issues that we commonly hear about in terms of foreign-related individuals, TBL violations, parking issues. I was really glad to see those in the lease. I think you did a good job of that, and I think that we can learn from that in terms of trying to apply standards like that to other items that come before us. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
The response plan I also think is good. The one area that struck me in reading through it was it seems to impose a burden on the complainant and says a lot about what the complainant should do or must do, and clearly there's no enforceability to that because the complainant is not a party to any of the agreements that we're talking about here, and you're nodding your head, so you've clearly thought through those issues, and I wonder if you might like to speak to that to some degree.
You know, sure, and that's one of the difficulties here, and to address Mr. Chairman's point is we don't know what effect this is going to have on the permit. If it's associated with the permit and we're found in violation of it, do we lose our permit? Are we fined every day? So that's why the large words were in there trying to protect the applicants as much as I could under not knowing what this is going to be used for, I guess, to answer your question or to address your concern. But I think you have a great point as far as maybe pulling it back a little bit, making it straightforward so that people know the proper procedure. And then to address your issue as far as there is quite a burden on a complainant, and I guess I don't know how to rectify that. I mean, I think there has to be at some point where they need to take initiative, and it's part of being a neighbor, and that goes back to Wilson Properties Group, is they want to have that discussion and interaction with the neighbors so that, you know, as you'll see here, they'll provide things to the complainant if the complainant asks for it. So I completely understand your concern, and so it does put a little bit of the onus on that, just some of the neighbors within 300 feet of going and getting it, and then you figure, okay, it's a lease, so this is gonna have to be done every year. And so, candidly, I don't know the answer to it.
Ms. Brestrup?
I was wondering, to whom would this response plan be distributed? Would it be distributed to all the neighbors? Or
Yeah,
how would the
300 feet.
neighbors know about this response plan?
Yeah. It says 300 feet, right?
Right, and I think the answer is, I don't know. I don't know if there's any directive on it, to be honest. I don't know if this just gets attached to the special permit. You find it on the registry. If, you know, if it's granted and there's no appeal, then it's on the registry, and so then I guess the thought is that the neighbors are on notice and the copy is kept. You know, I don't know if the board would want us to distribute it. And so these are just some of, again, like I said, in theory, it's great, but in practice, we're facing some real issues here. So again, I'm open to any suggestions.
Just, you were talking about the legal side of it, and I've been considering your talk about principals and agents, and of course, that's the concept that, of an employer-employee or something along those lines where, you know, one person has the authority to make decisions for another one. For instance, this qualified person would either not have or not have the authority to make decisions on behalf of Wilson Properties, right? In this case, whether to call the police, for instance, or to speak to neighbors on behalf of the tenants, maybe. I would really urge you to reconsider the idea of actually having this qualified person be an agent of Wilson Properties, perhaps in exchange for a reduction in rent or some other incentive for them to, you know, just as in a college dormitory, the RA on a floor receives, in many cases, reduced room and board fees in exchange for having to be the babysitter for the floor, right? That's basically what we're talking about here is, my understanding of what the qualified person on site would be someone who acts like an RA and sort of keeps tabs on things and, like you said, is the point person if there's any complaints from, you know, the neighbors or from, for that matter, for tenants themselves, if tenants are having trouble with each other. And, you know, the liability side of that aside, I think my understanding of what we were talking about by putting that qualified word in there is that we were talking about someone who would have some type of authority. That's just my personal understanding.
Hi, good evening to everyone. I'm Pete Wilson. I think we've lost something in the translation, so I thought maybe I'd just speak up.
Use the microphone, please.
Sure. Essentially, this is what I've done over the last many years. Whatever configuration that I have as a tenant, whether it be a family or whether it be professional people, whether it be graduate students, whether it be graduate, undergraduate by themselves, there's someone of the group that from the beginning I work with. And that person is my contact person. That person has the vested interest of the group because they are part of it, whether it be the mom or the dad, however the makeup is. So as you talk about this resident agent and having authority and so forth, the key thing I want you to focus in on is they need to abide by the lease. And the person who is my contact or resident there has every bit of interest in it because if they're evicted, he or she is out of a place. They're bound by the lease, and therefore there's responsibility, legal responsibility. So they don't necessarily sign and move in just to be evicted and moved out. So I'm trying to help the board understand that they really have a truly vested interest, whether they keep a roof over their head or not. I go to them if there's an issue, such as if rent's late or there's no rent at all. I go to them if we have any kind of issue with trash outside, or as we do periodic inspections, that the house is kept relatively in good order. If there's any activity outside, such as a car on the lawn, as I said to Tom, if I'm there, I see it, I call Amherst Towing, I wait right there. I've had people come out and say everything they want, and I said, hey, it's in the lease. Unfortunately, you're going to pay the tow guy $100, but he's coming and he's towing it. And you take care of that. And you one time only, and it's dealt with. So hopefully you can get a flavor for that person is really responsible. Otherwise, they're not going to be part of the group, and they're not going to want any part of this. The lease is pretty thorough. And if they're going to sign that, knowing full well these are the obligations that they have to live with, you know, I've never experienced people getting in there, valid people, not just, you know, and this isn't a case of I've got to rent it, so I'm going to take anyone and the first group that comes along kind of approach. So hopefully that clarifies. So you kind of get the flavor of, you know, they really are responsible. So with the house being new, I don't see where there's any decision-making that has to be effected on behalf of my brother or I. Their focus and main focus is to live by the covenant set forth in the lease, be neighborly. And as Tom pointed out, we want to have a little check and balance because they're renting the place. They're entitled to be able to do everything any neighbor can do in the neighborhood. Now, we are all looking at the worst case. So we're looking at the worst possible people and the neighbors having to put up with it. But in fact, we hope that they will be good neighbors and enjoy the property and the area. And so maybe some of this will, you know, eventually, we won't have to focus on the total negatives, but you kind of get the sense is what I'm trying to share.
All right.
Any questions?
Questions for Mr. Wilson? Mr. Rosnoy?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Wilson, for that description. And I commiserate with you. I suspect I speak for most of the board here that we commiserate with you that you're the first really application that's coming forward since this change in the bylaw. But the change was brought on, and I hope you understand our perspective, that the change was brought on by a crying need from the residents of the town because of student rentals not having a qualified individual on site who can address issues immediately as they come up.
Right.
So unfortunately, that's the position that you're in right now. I entirely believe that your history and your abilities would be able to handle things as you describe them. Unfortunately, you're dealing with a situation in this town that has a history that we're trying to address. And so I highly encourage you to upgrade the level of authority that your on-site manager would have to be able to deal with those issues by themselves, on-site, immediately, with authority.
And so what kind of authority you're looking for? Because they know what the lease requires. So if they're holding a party and there's 10 or more, they know they're going to get their hand slapped when we find out they didn't notify us, if that were to be the case. So I'm just having, and I think Tom will have the same issue, what more authority do you want them to have?
Well, I don't know how other people might describe it, if I may. But I think some of what you just described as if somebody complains to you, you say, hey, you have to deal with the lease. Well, we don't want it to be a third-party communication. If the on-site manager, who is, by the way, being compensated for whatever they're doing, I believe that's how it was seen, as if they're qualified, that they should receive some compensation. If the on-site manager sees a violation of any aspect of the lease, that they have the authority to deal with it right there, on
Okay,
the
so
spot.
you're making a distinction that monetary reimbursement means they're going to abide by the lease that they agreed to in advance before they moved in. I'm just trying to be clear.
Not
So,
necessarily
I'm
them.
going to just short-circuit
Sure.
this
Yeah,
for a
thanks.
second.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
What we have here is, if I can just pick this out a little further, we have a local landlord who's also the owner and is actively involved in the management of the property. This is not a third-party property management company that manages a number of properties for a number of different owners. This is a landlord who owns the property and has a vested interest in keeping it up.
Correct.
And they've also made representations to us that they are actively involved in the management of the property themselves. I think that is, if we were talking about someone who was out of town and lived in California and owned the house, I think this would be a very different picture, but that's not what we're talking about here. In the interest of time, I'm just going to say that I think that this is an entirely appropriate project for where it's being
Yeah.
built. I think it's a good faith effort to comply with the existing bylaw and the upgrades that we made to it. And also, I think that the owner, property managers, the Wilson brothers here, are to be commended for the hands-on approach they apparently take with their properties. It's exactly the type of property management, I think, that we're looking for in Amherst. So I would be prepared to make a general recommendation to the to the ZBA that this project is within the spirit of the changes that we made to it, regardless of the specifics of what they decide about what qualified means, because they'll be the ones making that decision.
Can I make a very short suggestion?
Yes.
That it might be as simple that there's a separate lease for the on-site property manager that outlines what their duties are, so that there's one lease for the general tenants and one for the on-site manager?
Mr. Cronin?
And if I could just respond quickly to
Yes.
that. What we do is we ask all the participants on the lease to sign the same lease.
I see.
Thereby, they know from start to finish how they have to conduct themselves. And although it could be done that way, I would still want that same lease or that separate lease with duties so that there's no part of the group that feels like they're any different than the designated on-site person. And, we use that word designated on-site, but essentially it's the point person. Just like I said, if it's a traditional family, if it's just a family and there's a mom that says, hey, I handle the finances, so I'm going to take care of all the things. Don't bother my husband. He's out of town 2 days a week, whatever, or vice versa. Then he or I, whoever it is, we really work out and make sure that if there's any problem, same thing, if there's a problem with the property, not all of them call me. The one person calls and says, hey, our hot water seems to be kind of poor. We don't have hot water in the morning, only good for one shower. The garbage grinder doesn't work. You kind of get the sense that I work with that person then works with the makeup of the situate the group.
I agree with what the chair said. This is a duplex application. Duplex does not require on-site manager. It requires qualified management, and the qualified applies to the Wilson property, not to the on-site, to the resident manager. So they can set it up however they want. I think they've set it up in a very good way. I don't think we need to ask anything more than that.
Further comments from the board?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. The question now is what we're here in an advisory capacity of the ZBA. Is there anyone on the board who's opposed to a general statement to the ZBA that this project complies with the spirit of what we were trying to do with these new provisions of the zoning bylaw?
Well, I would say it complies. I think you're qualifying it too much by saying the spirit of.
Okay.
I would like, when the board's ready, to make a motion that we make a strong recommendation to the ZBA in support of this application.
I think I'll consider that a motion. Do we have a second?
Excuse me, I didn't hear that.
I would move that we recommend that the ZBA approve this application, and they can take care of the details of conditions, that we approve this application because we think it complies with the zoning bylaw, and we think it's the right use in the right location.
I'll second.
Any further discussion? All right, all in favor? And that's unanimous. Thank you for the excellent presentation
Thank you.
and for your hard work on this project. We wish you luck.
Thank you. Good luck.
And Ms. Brestrup, shall we, how will we transmit our statement to the ZBA?
I can write a letter on your behalf.
That would
that
be wonderful.
Suitable? All right.
Thank you. It'll be very short. All right. Moving right along, we have Atkins here with a review of minor changes to their site plan. This is site SPR 2010-00011 M524 1150 West Street.
Thank you, everyone. Good evening. Jeff Squire from the Berkshire Design Group, here on behalf of Atkins and Pauline Lannon. I'll try to keep this brief. There's just some minor changes that have occurred as a result of primarily the road project that is almost completed. The overall project for Atkins received approval, I think last spring is when it was. It's also largely complete. I believe they got either a full CO or a temporary CO a week or two ago. But most of the addition and most of the modifications, the parking lot, excuse me, and most of the site work is complete. There's a little bit of some site work to do in the spring, obviously. But one of the issues that has come up is when they constructed the roadway, West Bay Road, what ended up happening, unbeknownst to us, was that the grade on this road ended up getting lowered from what we had designed to. And so as a result, what we had initially shown as a crosswalk and a connection at this location isn't necessarily possible now because of the grades. We can't get an ADA access ramp in there without chasing the grades way down, roughly almost to the roundabout. And so what we're here to do, and as a possible solution, and part of this has risen out of observations and students crossing when they did the wetland replication area for the road work. What is now, you see there's essentially a gravel road there now that they use to access that portion of the site, but students now cross the field and they essentially cross right here and walk in this way. And so one of the options that we'd like you to consider and we're presenting is, rather than taking a crosswalk this way and then chasing it back down gradient, is to take put a new sidewalk in along this portion of the building so that people can cross and make this connection. This entrance right here, if you remember, is really primarily for service deliveries. It's not meant for vehicles to come in and enter the parking lot. I think on the sketch that you may have in front of you, there's some question marks about do not enter signs. That was really my sketch to Atkins to verify whether those were installed or not. They have been installed. All the signage is in there. So there are do not enter signs here for passenger vehicles, for patrons of Atkins. This is really a service entrance. This is where employees park, or where their delivery, some of their small delivery trucks park. But we recognize the need to get people safely from Hampshire College, from students across the street to the front of Atkins, and are trying to explore safe ways to do that, and really hear what you have to say, and get some feedback from you, because we recognize that this was an area of a lot of focus in the earlier hearing. So. But this route essentially would, what we would do is provide a striped crosswalk that would enable pedestrians coming off this sidewalk to get into the parking lot, and then enter, into the main entry.
I see a lot of nodding heads here, and I, for one, am a big fan of putting the path where the dirt is bare already.
Yep.
So, unless does anybody on the board have any objection to this at all?
Yeah, I have a question
questions?
also.
Sure.
Yeah.
Please go ahead, Mr. Crowner.
So at the west end of the striped crosswalk, I don't really understand how it connects to the sidewalk.
Well, we can do a striped crosswalk, all the way across. I guess that's a question, is whether, we stripe that entire area.
No, well, it looks like it. There's like a gap between. There's like a little box on the gray area on my thing. I don't know what. I can't really see that. But
Right where it says do not enter sign?
right where it says, where there's a do not enter sign, and there's an arrow pointing.
Right
And,
here.
and I just don't really understand how
You'd
that's.
have to see the. Oh, the intent would be that I think people would come onto this sidewalk and cross directly over into the striped area, not necessarily, here and then over. I think right now is if you observe students or people crossing, they come down this sidewalk and then head straight for this corner of the building. So this would at least enable them a safe route that's designated for pedestrians.
Is there a reason not to just stripe it directly where they walk instead of going around the corner? Like diagonally across the parking lot?
No, other than I think it's going to look a little odd with a.
Safety-wise, is there any reason to stripe it at all? I mean, is it a dangerous area for them to walk?
No, and this is really part of the discussion purpose, is whether we need to stripe it, because I think, functionally, the vehicles that park here are either employees that are there for the day, or the small delivery vans that they've got for flowers and some of the catering services. Otherwise, it's the the trucks, and once they come in and back up, they're there for for the delivery, and there's no other vehicles passing through here. So I questioned the need to stripe this, and it was really there as as a talking point.
I guess I would support the idea of striping it. To me, it would seem to create some recognition for the people that are parking there, the employees and the delivery trucks, that is an area that, even though it might not be used at the moment that you're backing out of that parking space, that it could potentially have people in it. And over time, that kind of reinforces the idea that you need to exercise care when you're in that area.
Mr. Carson?
I just wanted to ask if there's any lighting around the crosswalk on the building side?
I know there's some exterior building on the exterior lighting on the building, and I know there's lighting, as part of the road project directly. I know there's this pole directly across the street. There's also a pole here, and there is one off this corner. I'm not sure whether there's one shown right at the corner there. I'm not sure whether that was installed or not, because I think some of the lighting on the building may have negated the need for that. But there is lighting back there.
Kruger?
If residents from Applewood were to walk down, would they also be following this route to come over?
I would suspect that's probably the shortest route now until such time that this road gets extended out.
Okay.
Right.
Because I would support Mr. O'Keefe's suggestion of actually having a demarcated area that is kind of the safe haven for, if you're walking there, you don't expect one of the cars to back out, and it puts the cars on notice that that is the safe pedestrian route, even if people choose to cross over a different way.
I wouldn't disagree with you.
Further comments? Mr. Crowner?
I move to approve the amended sidewalk plan, or whatever.
Any further discussion? All right, all in favor? All right, thank you very much for coming in. We appreciate it. Amherst College is next. This is review of proposed changes to exterior panels on site plan review 2012-00007. Trustees of Amherst College, 79 South Pleasant Street. Mr. Davies, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Glad to be back. You'll probably all recall that you saw this project a while back, and we went through the whole process with various committees and whatnot, and gained approval for it. In the construction process, just by way of a little history of how this came to be, during the construction process, the supplier for a fairly unique cladding system for the exterior of the addition portion at the back of the building became, I'll just say, from a business negotiation perspective, it became non-viable to work with them. And if you're interested in the details, it's just they weren't a company that we were able to work with. There are really only two companies that make the type of thin stone. This is a very specific product. It was a very thin stone, about 1/4 of an inch thick, large sheets, adhered to a honeycomb aluminum system to give it strength, but very lightweight so that it could be hung very far off of the building, so we can have a very thick insulation layer because it's a high-performance building. So that's really what drove us to this very specific system. That system became non-viable, and so we started working with our architects to figure out alternatives to that. They identified a number of options that you might even might come to mind, metal panel, other types of approaches that are lightweight, modular type panel systems, and terracotta, which is what we're here to talk about. So what we're specifically talking about is the cladding of the addition, which is, I'll take this over here, point things out so it's specific. The addition is at the rear of what was the Baptist church, and what you had seen and approved was something that kind of carried the coloration, roughly speaking, of the original building back through the addition. That became something that we couldn't work with. And so at first we started thinking about doing those types of colors in terracotta, but as the architects got into it, as we started talking about it, it became really appealing to pursue this option, which is actual terracotta color, for a number of reasons. And I guess I'll hand it over to the architects to describe the pattern of colors down the street and the background scopes and whatnot. But that's the extent of what we're here to talk about.
Hi, I'm Chuck Roberts, Communal Architects. So yeah, originally we had this lightweight stone veneer cladding on the building, and we did a lot of extensive research to match the stone and to the existing church, and And it was a really pretty thoroughly thought out process because we thought we wanted, because at the time we wanted to have this clad in stone. But when the option for the stone sort of fell away, we had the option, we had to start looking for other materials to clad this structure in, as Tom was saying. And originally we were looking at it as sort of a cream and gray terracotta to kind of match the original color scheme and match the church. And it just, you know, no matter how hard we tried, it never quite was able to match the church in a way that was satisfying or give us the same kind of effect we were looking at with the stone panels. And so the thought was to go with the terracotta tile there, and we did a couple studies, elevation studies, and then we plugged it into this Photoshop image looking from Seeley Street across the bow of Hitchcock to the addition in the back and the church here, and then these studies sort of looking up East Pleasant Street, or looking up Pleasant Street, and then this sort of the street row in here, and it really starts to, you know, emphasize the fact that this is really what we're seeing in all this context is series of brick structures, white structures, the white portico of Hitchcock, you know, which sort of balances off the white on the church. These storefronts along in here, which are brick, and then there's the lighter color along in here of this building, and the church again. So it really starts to fit into the overall fabric in a way that we really like, and we think it actually, in some ways, it's more respectful of the church, because rather than trying to emulate that color, it creates this the terracotta backdrop, which again ties it into the fabric and sort of complements the church even more. We think it also is going to be more in the character of what's happening in back of this building. You think of it as just an alley, but it's actually, you know, you see the building from all edges and perspectives, and so it's actually going to tie into what's happening in the back of the building a little more successfully as well, we think.
Ms. Brestrup?
I just wanted to note that the Design Review Board did look at this, and they recommended approval of this new scheme. I think they felt that the new terracotta helped the older white building to stand out a bit more, and that the terracotta color did fit in with the brick buildings around it. So I didn't have an opportunity to write up their comments, but if Ms. Ford were here, I think she would agree with what I'm telling you, that the Design Review Board went along with this change in the cladding.
Any comments or questions, Mr. Carson?
Is the terracotta in the form of, does it look like bricks, or is it large panels? What does it look like exactly? Do you have a depiction of it?
Well, it's a rain screen panel, so actually it's going to be there's a varying number of and sizes of these panels, and the maximum length is 5 feet, and we have varying of heights on this from 6 inches to 10 inches to 18-inch height panels. So we're creating this sort of woven running bond of this rain screen system. So it's varied sizes and lengths.
And then there's some kind of mortar in between, or how are they fixed?
Well, no, it's going to be an open rain screen, which means that there's going to be about a 3 to 5/8 of an inch gap between all the panels. So it'd actually be really nice to read sort of the depth of the material through the shadow lines of the spaces between the panels.
Anyone else? Well, from here it looks good. This is why I'm not on the Design Review Board. Does anyone want to maybe move to?
Also move.
He's moved. I'll second.
Okay. All right. I think. Go ahead, Mr. Schreiber.
I'll move to approve.
And Mr. O'Keefe seconded. Any further discussion? All right. All in favor? All right. Thanks very much for coming in. Appreciate it. Before we move to the next item, we're going to take a 2-minute break.
Thank you. Thanks.
see it, Tom?
Now that you put it, I could augment it if they were enthusiastic.
Which-
I'm going to ask them to take emails.
Saying things better than I can.
What
They
is-
didn't hate it.
What does the timetable look like at this point?
This one is
We should be finishing.
Mechanic Street and Bay.
Brooke?
That's great.
Great. Good luck.
Chris, is there a vacancy on the design review board?
Yes.
I know somebody that might be interested.
Oh, good.
Meeting for coffee tomorrow. Do they have to be a certain qualification?
There are different categories. And I think we've got all the categories filled. There's the description.
Okay.
So we have
So you have two architects, right? Three
Derek
arch-
Noble and
Yeah.
Jonathan Salmon and Kathleen Ford.
So you do meet that.
And
You-
we have a representative of the planning board, and we have a representative of the historical commission. And I believe we have a building, or excuse me, a downtown business owner, which would be Jonathan Salvan, who is a
Mhm.
partner
Oh, right,
at
of
Kuhn
course.
Riddle. So I think we have all the categories
Okay.
satisfied. So if you have someone who's, what would we call that person, an at
Wild card,
large?
what is the term when you don't need to fit us at large?
At
Yeah, you're right.
large,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. You're not from a certain precinct.
Yeah, so ask that person to submit a CAF.
I will do.
I think it's the, I don't remember which group that appoints these people. Is it, select board or?
She's relatively new to town. I'm not sure she's an Amherst voter, but
These classes, okay, appointments are made by the select board.
Just stick around here over the holiday?
So just.
Yeah, and over the Christmas.
Didn't go to see.
Sometimes we have trouble reaching a quorum, so it would
Huh?
be good to have
To
an
this
extra
right
member.
Oh, I
so
see.
what days does
I
it meet,
see.
or is it a set time? or-
Tuesdays,
What time normally?
usually 6:30 on Tuesdays.
For some reason, I thought she was like in California or something.
So did you have this last couple of days on your bikes? To 65? or-
I did on Saturday,
Oh, she was.
before it really got warm, so. Chilly at that point.
Oh, on a stationary bike.
Riding around the parking lot.
All right.
Stationary.
Thanks for your patience, everyone. We're going to go out of order again and go to item 6 on our agenda, which is an A&R application, approval not required. Mr. Perry, please come forward, identify yourself.
Hello,
What you
I'm
got in
Sean
mind?
Perry from Sunwood Builders. I'm representing the owner of this piece of land, Nancy Garaband. And she hired me to look into putting an addition on her house off of Mechanic Street Extension. And as we looked at the property lines, it was evident that, I'll hold it like this so you can see. It was evident that there was not room enough for the addition, but at the same time, we noticed that the property line between these two properties are owned by the same family.
Maybe you could come forward a little more and
Sure.
just,
These two properties, this is Mechanic Street and Bay Road. These two properties owned by the same family. And the old property line crossed the part of the garage.
I see.
So as we looked at issues with putting an addition on this house, we also identified that the property line was, they had difficulties between the distances of all these existing structures in the building. So what we're doing is we're looking to get approval for a new property line between the two properties and allow us to put the addition, but at the same time, relieve that issue that would have come regardless as they were looking to sell this property. that would have had to come back and deal with that. This is not a structure that could be moved. It's like a two-car garage barn type of a thing that's storage, and it has, I believe, a concrete foundation. So in order to do that, what we've done is we used the same frontage. We haven't changed the frontage, but we moved this line sort of in between these two little barns, and they're close to meeting the regulations of the town. The regulation states that if this is an accessory structure, the distance to the property line should be the height of the building. So we are close to matching it by going more or less equal distance between those, and then we come across and keep the distance that the town regulates between this structure here and equal that square footage with this square footage. So as a result of this, these lots remain the same size. We're just correcting the issue with the property line and at the same time giving us enough room to put that the addition that they'd like to do.
Thank you. If I may say so, that's very clever.
Yeah, yeah. Future archaeologists are going to wonder what the hell is going on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is not the worst property line that I've seen.
No.
But the idea was that if we maintain the same frontage, if we maintain the same square footage,
right,
then we have minimized the difficulties in approving this and looking at this as an awkward situation.
Can you just come up?
Yeah.
So is the height of the buildings
13? This is slightly shorter than this, and the distance here is slightly smaller than this. So I would guess, I measured it, I think it was about 16 feet, 18 and 20. And the distance to the property line is just slightly less than that. Part of the idea how to resolve this came from a discussion with Jonathan Tucker.
I know Nancy.
She works at UMass.
Yeah, yeah.
This property is non-conforming as to lot area,
Yeah.
but it
So you
will
can't make it
be
more
exactly the same
Yeah.
with regard to lot area because the exchange is the same square footage.
Thank you. So just, if we could just have the representation from you, Chris, that this complies with all with the frontage requirements and so forth that we're required to do for an A&R.
To my knowledge, it complies with frontage requirements because the property has frontage on Bay Road. It is no more non-conforming than it was to begin with regard to lot area. That is the corner piece. The other piece was not non-conforming as to lot area. And the new property lines will make the accessory buildings less non-conforming than they were previously. That's my understanding of the situation.
Any further comments from the board on this? All right, we'll sign it.
Okay, so may I just speak to Mr. Perry for a minute? Usually the chair signs these plans after the meeting because there's so many of them. So if you just leave them, he will sign them when the meeting's over, and then someone will call you to pick them up either tomorrow or the next day. Okay? Okay.
Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we're back to item 4D, signing of decision for the Amherst project. Ms. Brestrup.
You did not receive a copy of this decision in your packet, but you received a copy via email. I've made one change to this since you received it. Sue Krasnowski pointed out to me that since Mr. Crowner abstained from the vote, that his name should not be in the signature line, so I've removed his name. But otherwise, the text of this is exactly the same as what appeared in your minutes. So if you would be so kind as to sign.
And those are minutes that we've already approved.
That's right. Thank you.
All right, while we're working our way through that, are there any topics not reasonably anticipated as far as old business goes?
There are none as far as old business goes.
All right. I am going to begin reading this executive session script. At this point, the planning board needs to adjourn its open session and convene an executive session to discuss matters relating to litigation. An executive session is necessary because open discussion of these matters may have an adverse impact on the position of the town. The planning board will reconvene in open session following the executive session. Do I hear a motion to adjourn this open session and to convene an executive session?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mr. O'Keefe, seconded by Mr. Rosnoy, and we will have we need to have a vote by voice for each member to go into executive session.
Aye.
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 Schreiber, aye.
Keith, aye.
Aye.
All right. The planning board will now convene an executive session. The board will reconvene an open meeting following this executive session. Amherst Media, give us a... The next item on our agenda is item 5, new business, master plan implementation committee charge. The planning board in October of 2011 sent a draft charge recommendation to the select board for a master plan implementation committee. There was some minor changes that were to be made, and those have now been made. And so we've now had this the committee charge is now complete and in place. And what that means is that the town can now appoint members to this new master plan implementation committee, which means it's open to citizen participation, and anyone interested should submit their application online. I know there's an official name for that application, but I don't know it.
CAF? CAF.
CAF. You can submit a CAF, which is available on the town website, or call the town hall if you don't have internet access. Did anyone have comments on this?
Isn't there isn't there a planning board seat or seats?
Well, the charge reads as follows. The appointing authority is the select board. The number of voting members is 7 with a 3-year term of appointment. And the composition is to include 1 member or designate from the planning board. You're correct. 1 member or designate from the select board and 5 at-large members. And the charge is to implement the master plan as detailed in the charge. So I suppose that means we should appoint someone to serve as the planning board and to serve as the very first member of the committee, I might add, unless the select board has already beaten us to it. Ms. Brestrup?
I think what you would be doing is recommending someone to the select board, and then they would actually appoint the person?
Yes. Thank you for that correction. So think about it, and at our next meeting, we'll figure out who can so serve, unless someone wants to raise their hand right now.
I'm not volunteering, but I have a suggestion.
Yes, Mr. Crowner.
That's that the member would be, the designate would be representing the planning board. It might be useful for anyone who served on the original comprehensive planning committee to represent us. So if there's someone out there who was on that committee and is no longer serving the town in any way, to get back into it that way.
Thank you, Mr. Crowner. Does anyone want to nominate, for instance, Ms. Anderson or Ms. Ford?
Well, let's just talk this through. So how long is the appointment? 3 years. So you'd have to be a standing, do you have to be a standing planning board member at the time, the whole 3 years that you're on this, or?
Ms. Brestrup?
I believe it says you can be a member or a designate. So you all could designate someone who is not on the board to represent you, and then that person would come and report to you.
See.
Good point. Ms. Kruger, did you have
I was
something?
just wondering if some of the board members who were really active in the had any interest in being that
Maybe
person.
maybe somebody who might have a lot of time on their hands on Wednesdays after the.
We don't even know when this is gonna meet.
That's why I'm thinking you're perfect.
All right, so hearing no immediate volunteers, we'll come back to this at the next meeting. The next item for tonight is the PVPC Top 10 Resolves for 2013. Mr. Schreiber.
So we looked at this, by email after our last meeting, and Mr. Tucker came back with a suggestion which is actually similar to the suggestions we've made the 2 previous years, that at the end of resolve number 6, we include language that would include advocacy for study and improvement of the north-south corridor of the central corridor along the New England Central Railroad line via a connection at Palmer for both significant upgrading of freight capacity under the priorities of Mass Freight and Rail Improvement Plan and for new passenger rail service and connections between significant population and education centers in Vermont, Western Mass, and central southern Connecticut. So I think that's a completely reasonable suggestion. We've made similar suggestions in the past. It at least gets the discussion going. So I would, certainly endorse something like this if that's the will of the board.
I think it's a good idea to put it in there if they'll do it. They're gonna have to go to more than one page for their top 10 resolves.
Yeah. I could also recommend they go to a 6-point font,
I was gonna say or change the font.
or maybe get rid of the spacing between.
I'd propose going to a 12-point font using 2 pages, but that's just me. And maybe larger margins, as long as we're being particular. But I think the language is fine, and I do think, I know I'm not alone on this board thinking that we'd like to see improved rail connections in Amherst, especially with the loss of Amtrak coming up. Anybody, do we need a vote, or can we just have a consensus on
Yeah, I
this?
think we need a vote.
Mr. Crowner.
I move to request that the PVPC include the language suggested.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? One opposed, Mr. Rosnoy.
I don't think this is a proper allocation of limited resources.
The actual rail line or the study, if I may?
Either. Additional rail traffic is necessary, but this particular corridor, I don't think is a practical approach.
All right.
So 1, 2, 3. So the process has been just that I've emailed Tim Brennan what our recommendation is. Okay, and he'll come back with a counter recommendation. So yeah. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 2, 2, 1. Okay.
All right. Anything else on that topic? The top 10 resolves, or was just the one?
That was it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Next, we have our planning board schedule, which was actually earlier in the packet. And the upcoming meetings for January and February are the 30th of January, February 6th, February 20th. As far as agendas for those meetings, I'm thinking we'll continue with our open discussion of zoning to kick off those meetings unless we're really short on time. That seemed to work well last fall. Does anybody have any other suggestions as far as agendas? It's open. Okay. Ms. Brestrup, was there anything on that topic?
On the topic of agendas?
Or schedule or agendas, either one.
Well, there are a couple of public hearings that are coming up. Would you like me to talk about those now?
Sure, yeah.
On the 30th, you're going to be hearing from Stavros out on Old Farm Road. I may have mentioned this previously. They want to install a generator, and they're required to come before you with a site plan review application to do that. We're going to have to set up a site visit for that case. And the other one is the Bank of America, which I think I've also told you about. They're they want to construct some new sidewalks that will be handicapped accessible, both behind and in front of their building. And so you'll be hearing that on January 30th. And then on February 6th, the Child Care Center on Strong Street is putting on a new roof and a new HVAC system, so they're going to have a new stack on top of their building, or they're proposing to do that, and so they are also going to be coming before you on February 6th.
That's the one at Wildwood?
That's right. If you would like me to continue in the vein of site plan review applications that I'm aware of, there is also a proposal to build a new building down on West Street in I'm not exactly sure what it's called, but it's right near the Pomeroy Lane intersection. It's property that's owned by Ron Laverdier, and 417 West Street. They've already been to the Conservation Commission, and they're proposing to build a mixed-use building there with office space on the ground floor, and I think it's 2 stories of residential above that. So that will be coming before you. They haven't actually filed an application yet, but you will probably be seeing that in the next couple of months.
Speaking of that particular applicant, have we heard anything about potential construction on those buildings over on Meadow Street?
No, we haven't.
Just curious. All right, thank you, Ms. Brestrup, for the update. Any other A&Rs tonight?
Yes, there's one other one. I'll pass around a locus plan for this one. This project is also in South Amherst. It's along Southeast. It's near the intersection of Southeast Street and Mechanic Street. It's 2 properties, both of which have sort of odd shapes. The property that's shown in blue on this plan has a particularly odd shape, but it does conform to the zoning bylaw. The one next to it does not conform to the zoning bylaw because it doesn't have the required building circle. I think you're aware the building circle, the properties, in order not to have shapes that are very, peculiar, need to be able to contain a building circle that is equal to the required frontage. The diameter of the building circle needs to be equal to the required frontage. So this property shown in yellow is obviously very thin and could not accommodate that building circle. So then I'll show you a plan that shows how to remedy that situation.
And is there something proposed for this, just out of curiosity?
The idea is that the owners live in the parcel that's marked in blue on that plan, and they're proposing to sell the parcel that's marked in yellow. So the quite strangely shaped property is here, and they're taking this chunk off this triangle and adding it to this so that they can accommodate a building circle. The frontage on both properties is correct. So understand what's happening? Taking this triangle here and adding it to that property.
Thank you.
Thanks. Got it.
All right. And this, what's that? Yeah, I'll sign it afterwards. Were there any comments from the board on this A&R? Upcoming ZBA applications? Ms. Restrup, do we have anything coming up?
Yes, we do. And if you wouldn't mind, either now or later, going back to topics not reasonably anticipated under new business.
Now would be fine if you like.
Now would be good, okay. There was something that I missed during previous meetings that I should have distributed to you. It's a letter from Mass Development informing you about the Olympia Oaks project and asking you if you have any comments with regard to the project not complying with Amherst's regulations. I've given you all copies of the letter, and so I'm just giving you an opportunity to respond to that if you wish to. You don't have to respond to it, but I apologize for not having given it to you sooner, because they did send it to us in November, and they referred to Mr. Rosnoy as chair
Obviously,
of
an
the board.
intelligent
So.
Mr. Rosnoy, would you like to lead the discussion on this item?
And while you're at it, talk about the coup.
Nicely done.
Yes, right. We were going to tell you about it after Red Thursday.
I recall that we went through Olympia Oaks in some detail, at least twice.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine that we have any comments other than that, but please speak up if you do. This is your chance.
Not all at once.
Hearing none.
I'm assuming you're looking for an affirmative reply to them saying that it does, the project does not conflict with any existing local or regional comprehensive plan, or that it does comply with.
No, it actually is requesting that we advise in the event it conflicts with an existing local or regional comprehensive plan. It says nothing about what we should do if it complies. I suggest that silence is
Yeah,
sufficient.
it just appears to be noticed.
But it says advise the appropriate local and regional planning agencies to ascertain the relationship of a proposed project to any existing state, local, or regional comprehensive plan. I would be inclined to be more affirming of this project as meeting our local planning objectives.
Well, since it's addressed to me, I just would say that I don't think any response is necessary.
Ms. Kruger, if you'd like to prepare a response of the planning board, I'd be happy to sign. If
that's the pleasure of the members.
Wait a minute, shouldn't I sign it?
Been dethroned.
What was that, Mr. O'Keefe? Did you?
I agree that I think silence is fine, but if
Yeah.
I have no problem with the chair signing an affirmative response if that is viewed as suitable.
Can we just put a smiley face on it and send it back?
Get a Hallmark card.
If everyone's happy being silent,
Shouldn't I sign it?
I don't want to be.
Just kidding, just kidding.
Are you letting it drop?
I'll let a sleeping dog lie.
Okay. Moving right along. Thank you for bringing that to our attention, though.
You're welcome.
And we sent
I
a
assume
letter.
if that had been contentious and we had been opposing it, you probably would have brought it to our attention sooner, so.
Could send them a letter saying by unanimous vote, we decided to not respond.
We could do that. If Mass Development is watching, you'll know where we stand. that was, we've now been through, I believe, item number 8, because Ms. Brestrup has already advised us of upcoming applications. Am I correct?
Right, and I interrupted you when you were going on to item number 7. So if you'd like to go back to item number 7, I do have 2 things to report.
Okay.
One of them is a fairly minor project, a ZBA project. It's a request for a special permit to garage or park more than one commercial vehicle under the accessory use section of the zoning bylaw, or a home occupation for a tree service business, also under the accessory use zoning bylaw, at Deep Woods Drive, 15 Deep Woods Drive. It's a case where there's someone who has been operating a tree service from his home, and he is now seeking to get permission to have that business operating from his home and have the appropriate vehicles approved. So is that something that you're interested in seeing?
Going once? Going twice? Nope.
The second project is probably of more interest to you. I sent you information about this already. Toby Cone Family Investments are seeking a special permit to extend, alter, and enlarge a pre-existing non-conforming use by adding 54 apartments to Presidential Apartments at 950 North Pleasant Street. So I don't know if you're familiar with Presidential Apartments. It's a very long, narrow piece of land that comes off North Pleasant Street. You can't really see the apartments from North Pleasant Street, but when you get back in there, there are multifamily units back there that were built when multifamily units were allowed in that zoning district, which is RN. So the owners of that property are seeking to build new buildings. I believe each new building will have 6 units. Is that Mr. Schreiber has been discussing or corresponding with Jeff Bagg of the ZBA. He's the ZBA liaison about this. So 9 buildings, 6 units each. So they're 3-story buildings. And the question is, would you like to have a presentation about this? This has already gone to the ZBA for a first session of a public hearing, but they've continued the public hearing, so you have an opportunity to make recommendations to them if you would like to.
I'm inclined to say yes on this one, only because if this is a project that's appropriate in terms of providing student housing, I'd like the planning board to be in a position to either recommend for or against it in terms of the master plan. But I can be overruled on this if other people disagree.
This is something we talked about at the zoning subcommittee meeting in the terms of, are there any existing complexes that could be enlarged to provide more student housing? So I think it would be good to hear this.
I have a question of clarification. My understanding is that the first hearing was on January 24th, but you said that it's been continued.
You know what? I'm getting that confused. I'm sorry. I was getting it confused with 179 North Pleasant Street, Northampton Road. Northampton Road. Yes, it hasn't occurred yet. It will occur next Thursday. I guess my confusion stems from the fact that your next opportunity to hear about this is January 30th. So that would be after the 24th. But the expectation is that the ZBA will continue this hearing, and you can make a request that they continue the hearing in order to hear your recommendations.
Mr. O'Keefe?
I have a little bit of concern every time we talk about bringing one of these ZBA cases to come before the planning board, and as I did with the one that we heard earlier tonight. And that's based on the fact that I think it's difficult for this board to recommend approval or denial of a permit without having gone through a detailed and thorough public process. So what we heard tonight to me, was overwhelmingly in favor of that being an appropriate and reasonable use of that property. And so I didn't really have any hesitation about voting for that. But on something that's bound to be more complicated, I'm not sure how much detail it would be appropriate for us to drill into on that. And I really hesitate about essentially reconducting the ZBA process. And without conducting that thorough process, it's hard for me to understand how we could come to a meaningful recommendation one way or the other. So I recognize that for reasons already stated, this is something that is relevant to the board in its discussions. And so I could be convinced, but my inclination is to not get involved in this.
Ms. Kruger?
I'd like to convince you that it is appropriate. I don't think we're really having a sort of de novo kind of hearing. I think the details of the plan remain with the ZBA, but I think looking at it in terms of broader planning objectives that we've been dealing with, it's appropriate to say, we think this is a good location and, you know, a reasonable proposal before you, and not necessarily you should approve it as we've seen it. Give them the authority to work out details, but it seems like it has a lot of bearing on the planning issues that we're dealing with, and that's the part we could speak to, and I think we would get a general presentation and not the level of detail that they would be getting.
Mr. Schreiber?
So I think that it's helpful to get another set of eyes of people that are kind of in the game looking at these. So just one example is that Chris sent out the plans for this ahead of time, which has actually never happened. And so that's where we picked up that they were showing two-story buildings that were labeled as sixplexes, but there was only 4 units. So having an extra set of eyes looking at them, you know, sort of caught that error before the public hearing. So it's, you know, it's partly to, so I see the value in just other people that are you know, thinking about these things, looking at it, but I definitely agree with you that we don't have the, you know, the benefit of the deep dive that the ZBA does.
Mr. O'Keefe?
So I guess I won't object then. I would just caution us to make sure that we keep things, as Ms. Kruger stated, at sort of a high level and not get lost in the weeds of the really detailed conditions that really are in the province of the ZBA to be considering, and not for us to consider planning issues more than sort of site management issues.
That's a good point, Mr. O'Keefe, and perhaps there could be a direction to the applicant along those lines of what we're looking for. Mr. Rosnoy?
Yeah, I concur with all the comments, actually, including Mr. O'Keefe's. I was somewhat concerned earlier tonight when the language of our motion was so direct as to recommend to the ZBA approval of that application. I don't think that is our particular charge in reviewing those ZBA applications, and I would encourage each of us to go back and look over Mr. Tucker's memorandum that was in our packet tonight as to our charge, our responsibilities, and the scope of our authority in reviewing those applications, so that when this one comes up, we are not in a position of saying to the ZBA, we recommend or we don't recommend approval. That is not our responsibility, but we do have certain advisory responsibilities that we can engage in. And to the limit of those, I think this will be a good opportunity to review this in terms of how it fits into housing in the town generally. But I do encourage each of us to go back and look over Mr. Tucker's memo, which I think in an excellent way, set out our charge in reviewing ZBA applications.
So with that,
Can I take back my other motion and rephrase it so that I avoid that pitfall? Because I think you're probably right that was too strident a recommendation.
Earlier tonight?
Yes.
But it was so clearly something that was a good project that we were all in favor of. That
also, in that we were particularly hearing from them on the issue of these new zoning bylaw provisions that we were responsible for getting through town meeting. I mean, interpreting those and saying that they were sort of in line. So,
Would that be clear to the ZBA in the way the motion was worded? Because it did sound like we're telling you to approve this rather than we find this. What you just said able to be communicated in the language of that motion? Because I'm thinking now that maybe we started a direction we might not want to continue in.
I agree. I think we do have to be careful, and Mr. Rosnoy's point is well taken. I don't think we can take back what we've done already.
I don't think it's necessary.
Put the toothpaste back in the tube.
Yeah, unbake the cake. But let's, so, all right. We can also say we got enough stuff to do on our own and let the ZBA handle this one. It's entirely up to the, what do people want to do with our time?
If I may?
Mr. Rosner?
I think if we don't at least give some review to this, some of our audience will wonder whether we're really serious about addressing the issue of expanded housing in the area of North Pleasant Street and North Amherst. I think we almost have to.
Mr. O'Keefe?
I think the chair had an excellent suggestion a few moments ago when he suggested that we communicate, or staff communicate to the applicant sort of what our expectations are, and that we'd be looking at it at a high level, so that they come in prepared and don't give us a 90-minute presentation about, the building construction details and the landscaping and the illumination plan and things like that, because I think there's a consensus here that we shouldn't be looking at that stuff. So if they could tailor their remarks to the level that we'd be looking at it, I think that it will probably flow more smoothly and satisfy our objectives.
Yes, Ms. Brestrup.
Would you be able to give me some specific language about what you're looking for? Because these are people who are, well, they're from out of town. They're from Northampton and New York State, and they don't necessarily know a lot about issues that have been of concern to the planning board here. So if you could give me some specific language to transmit to them, that would be helpful.
Mr. Carson?
I would find helpful how the new buildings would relate to the already existing buildings. How much physical space is between them? How are they going to handle the parking?
I'd like to know about their management system and whether, what's their, the sort of plan that we just had from the applicant today in terms of handling complaints, and are there any neighbors close, and what's the effect on the surrounding area? And also specific, if there's something specific in the master plan that would support this type of project in this type of location.
I was very struck by something that Mr. Tucker said at the zoning subcommittee, which was that, most housing was built quite a while ago in Amherst, and so the needs are quite different now from when a lot of this housing was developed in the 60s and 70s. But this particular project seemed to basically click on and copy housing that's already there, that was developed 40 years ago, built 40 years ago, whereas everything's changed in 40 years. So I'm just curious why? In other words, why, how are they responding to?
How does the design correspond with current housing and demographic needs of the town?
Exactly. Yeah.
Is this the one where there's an engineer doing the plan and there's no architect? Well, that's why
Yeah.
it is the way it is.
So I'm also very curious on that line, compliance with Mass General Law, Chapter 112, Section 60A through 60N.
Mr. Schreiber, may I remind you that you're practicing law without a license?
If I may?
Yes, Mr. Rosnoy.
Ms. Brestrup, I'd recommend giving them some history of why we're concerned about multifamily housing in the North Pleasant Street area, or North Amherst area, and some of the concerns that we've heard about over the past number of months, and how this housing might have an impact on some of those concerns, and how they would intend to address those concerns, such as the management plan that was referred to and some of the other areas along those lines.
I'm trying to think, I think presidential, it hasn't been that problematic in terms of the different complexes, but maybe that's just my
No, I think you're right.
selective
Right.
reading. I think it's more family oriented.
But going along with my colleagues, I would like to see it, Mr. Carson said that buildings in relationship to each other and the context of that site in relationship to the other site. So we often don't get that high view, literally, in terms of what's around there, and I'd like to see that. This is the first time I can remember 54 new units of rental housing, market rental housing being proposed in I don't know how many years. So,
Olympia.
That's right, 42 of affordable housing. So I think it's very important that we look at it from the broader planning objectives and both the concerns from neighbors and possibly some kind of positive recommendations or directions, because they may benefit from coming before us in addition to going to the ZBA. So they should be happy.
All right, anyone else? I think the consensus is that we're gonna have a comment. And it'll be, let's say it's brief, you know, half hour, 45 minutes.
I'll get the duct tape.
If I may, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Just in terms of conduct of the meeting, that's something that you can enforce
Sure.
by, communicating with them
Yeah.
at the meeting or maybe even beforehand, because if people have an understanding about what kind of time frame we intend to devote to it, that's good. Otherwise, things tend to expand to fill the space available.
So just real quick, was today's review approximate, was it too short, too long, or just right?
It was just right, except for somebody on planning board talking too much. Me.
Because I gave them about an hour, a little less. Mr. O'Keefe?
I didn't think that you gave them, you handled the meeting inappropriately, but I would have liked to have seen that be shorter, just in the context of the relative importance of the types of projects that we're talking about. So we're talking about, in the future, considering 56 new units. That's something that deserves a higher level of scrutiny. And so if we spend 30 or 45 or 60 minutes talking about that, just proportionally, my preference would be to not spend an hour talking about a duplex that ultimately is not a decision that we're making. So that's just my 2 cents worth.
Ms. Brestrup, thank you.
This is a very helpful discussion because attorneys and applicants often ask me, what is it that the planning board is looking for? And in the past, I've been operating under the assumption that you are looking to share your experience with reviewing site plans, which you have, a vast experience with, often with larger projects than the ZBA has. And so you're looking at issues of traffic circulation or lighting or whether there's enough landscaping and that type of thing. So my understanding from your discussion tonight is that those things are not necessarily what you would like to look at when you review a project. You would like to look at it more in terms of how does it fit in with the master plan and how does it fit in with some of the issues that you're working on with regard to zoning amendments and that type of thing. Is that correct, or?
Well, I think it differs based on the project, but yes. I think, I for one don't intend to go into details if possible about, anything. It's more of an overview, right? In terms of the ZBA application, unless there's some particular aspect of it that's really problematic that somebody wants to tease out of it, of course that's fine.
I was just thinking, I can barely remember what happened with the duplex, but yes, it was just 2 units, but it hit on a really important issue that we hadn't looked at before, which was the complaint response plan. And I got I was kind of torn between the role of the manager, an active, responsible manager, and then kind of going in the direction of saying, well, you have to pay this person or they have to be this qualified. And I think we're in uncharted waters, and I have mixed feelings myself about which way to go with that. So I think that one took more time because of those issues and not, well, you know, the design of 2 units.
Mr. O'Keefe?
I completely agree with that statement, and I certainly was not meaning to imply that we spent too much time talking about it, because we did spend most of our time talking about this new thing that we ourselves have brought into being through the zoning changes that we passed last fall. So that was a very relevant and useful discussion, I think.
All right.
Just to wrap up, may I?
Yes.
So in telling applicants and attorneys what you are interested in looking at, I should not emphasize details about the site plan?
I think it would depend on the project.
We'll let you know. How about that?
We know it when we see it.
I mean, we don't say yes to a lot of these, so it's, I mean,
That's right.
having 2 in such a short period of time, I can't remember, but maybe one other one we ever did in the last 3
We
years.
did the one on High Street. There was 10 units or something on High Street.
Yep.
Yeah, I, for one, would like to see the site plans up on an easel,
Yeah, I would too.
if that's your question.
Yeah.
To me, this seems important because it is something that we might want to initiate with other projects, as we talked about. So how they handle the site, I think, would be important for us to see, and the parking.
All right, thank you.
Clear as mud. Anything else on upcoming applications, Chris?
No.
All right. I believe, and anybody can stop me, that we're on to item 9, which is committee and liaison reports. PVPC, Stephen, anything besides your top 10 list?
Done.
CPAC was Sandy, she's not here. Agricultural Commission, I have no report. Transportation?
Well, there was some communication earlier today regarding whether this group is going to get reorganized, and I defer to Ms. Brestrup. Was there any follow-up that you received back, or?
I have not received follow-up from Mr. Mooring. I was going to let him speak with Mr. Musanti like he said he was planning to do. And I believe that possibly Mr. Tucker will be also speaking with Mr. Musanti about the topic.
Good, yeah. As an update, it was actually this month that the original charge was for us to have a report to who? Select Board, I think?
To Mr. Musanti.
To Mr. Musanti. And we haven't met in 8 months, so it needs to be re-energized.
It does.
Recharged, actually.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Rosnoy. Redevelopment Authority, Ms. Kruger?
They haven't been meeting. Nothing to report.
Thank you. Design Review Board is Ms. Ford, she's not here. Housing and Sheltering Committee?
Just a brief, but they had a meeting this morning to look at the strategy section, the draft strategy section of the Housing Production Plan, which I'd received by email and read, but I wasn't able to attend today. So I think they are nearing completion, and I hope that when the Housing and Sheltering Committee completes their review of the document and it can be shared with the Planning Board, that people will have a chance to read it and make some comments.
Thank you, Ms. Kruger. And last but not least, Safe and Healthy Neighborhoods would be Ms. Anderson. Does anyone have an update on this? Hopefully, I know that they were scheduled for at least 2 meetings this month. And I understand that they're, Mr. O'Keefe?
I know that they have been meeting regularly and have had meetings already this month, and their next upcoming meeting is next Tuesday, which will be a public comment period on their progress to date, an opportunity for people to offer feedback. I don't know what time it is. They normally meet during the daytime, but I have a feeling that meeting is scheduled for the evening, but please double check the calendar on the town website.
Ms. Brestrup?
I believe there's a meeting on the 20th, which is, did you say that was Tuesday? Yes, and I think it's from 7 to 9, but I'm not exactly sure where it is, but it would be on the website. And the purpose of that meeting is to let people know what they've been working on, and to people who haven't been attending the regular meetings, and to allow the public to speak, because the public hasn't been invited to speak at their regular meetings, because they wanted to get the work done, so.
Thank you, Ms. Brestrup.
I just have a procedural question.
Yes, Mr. Carson.
If a number of us would end up going to that meeting just as spectators, is that any sort of a problem? As far as, that doesn't constitute us being there as holding a meeting, does it?
Ms. Brestrup.
My understanding is, as long as you don't discuss anything among yourselves that is going to come before you, that you may attend the meeting, and that it doesn't need to be posted as a planning board meeting.
So just do this.
Never write when you can talk, never talk when you can.
The report of the chair is, I hope everyone has started off the new year on the right foot, and I look forward to working with you all again this year. Any report of staff?
No report of staff.
And I guess we're adjourned. Thanks, everybody. And thanks to Amherst Media.